Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Chris Impey back with us after 6 years as a university distinguished professor in the astronomy department at the University of Arizona, Tucson. His research interests center in observational cosmology, gravitational lensing, and the evolution and structure of galaxies. Chris is a past vice president of the American Astronomical Society, has served on its executive council and its astronomy education board. His web design and curriculum projects have been supported by both NASA and the National Science Foundation, and here he is. What took 6 years to come back, Chris?
I know, George. It's been a while. It's been too long.
Good to have you with us. Your latest book, Worlds Without End. Fascinating possibilities in that book, by the way.
Yeah, the exoplanet field is just, it's booming. It really is. We've just gone from 0 to over 5,000 in just over 2 decades.
Explain, Chris, what an exoplanet is.
So it's a planet that orbits another star. And, people had speculated about the existence of planets elsewhere in the universe for centuries. I mean, why should our solar system be the only set of planets? But it's a very difficult observational experiment, so it really took a long time to find them. And the first one wasn't detected until 1995.
How did we discover them?
Well, it's indirect. You think the simple thing is just to look for one. But if you just imagine being far from the solar system, the Earth is going to reflect 1/billionth of the sun's light, and it'll sit very close to the sun. And we're seeing it from very far away. So it's sort of looking for a firefly next to a football stadium floodlight. Really hard to do.
Chris, is it safe to assume that almost every star might have planets?
Yes, that number is, we now know that. So essentially, on average, every star has at least one planet. So however many stars there are in the galaxy and the universe, there's that many stars at least.
Are we unusual in our solar system to have so many planets?
Not necessarily. There are some solar systems around other stars that have 8 or 9 planets like ours. What's unusual is there's a set of planets called super-Earth. They're bigger than Earth. We don't have a super-Earth in our solar system, so our solar system may not be completely typical.
What kind of technology, Chris, do we have that allows us to find these exoplanets?
It's very accurate spectrographs. So the methods that are used are indirect methods. We're looking for the wobble of a star based on a planet tugging on it by gravity, or the planet passing in front of the star and just dimming it very slightly each time it orbits.
I noticed that our buddy Seth Shostak from SETI wrote a little snippet for your book.
Yeah, I know Seth. I've known him for a while, and he's got a great podcast too, so he's a good friend.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Tell us about NASA's Kepler mission. What was its intent, and how successful has it been?
So Kepler was amazing. It's a 1-meter telescope, and that wouldn't put it in the top 70 biggest telescopes. So it's not that big a telescope. But as its principal investigator said, it was the most boring mission ever. It stared at a single patch of sky and took a picture every 6 minutes for 5 years, just looking for that momentary dimming of a star caused by a planet passing in front of it. So it did one very simple thing very, very well, and it found several thousand exoplanets.
Wow. And what about James Webb?
James Webb is an interesting case because it's a beautiful telescope. It's wonderful, biggest telescope we've ever had in space. But it was designed before exoplanets were discovered, so it really wasn't optimized for the experiment of studying them. So it's going to do some work on exoplanets, but it's not the best tool for the job. There are other missions and other big ground-based telescopes that'll do better.
In your book, Worlds Without End, you talk about the possibilities of us having to leave planet Earth to go to other planets. Just how serious is that?
Well, we're not doing too well with taking care of our planet. I still think, on average, we're better off staying here and doing a better job at taking care of the planet because, the options are not good. In the solar system, we got Mars. It's not really very habitable. A lot of work needed and a lot of money and a lot of time to make it habitable.
And how do you move the people who are on the planet? Who goes?
That's right. Who's going to go? Well, Elon Musk will, take some small number of people for a large amount of money. So, yeah, it's unrealistic. We're never going to leave in large numbers. So, and that's just in the solar system. You go to exoplanets, they're millions of times further away. So they might be out there, Earth-like planets, places we could possibly live, but they're just inaccessible.
Would you rather, Chris, stay on the planet Earth, make it try to work like you just mentioned, fight to make it work, do whatever you have to do, rather than escape going to a little planet where you may have to live in a capsule for the rest of your life?
I'd rather stay here and make it work on Earth, and I think most of us should choose that.
Yeah, me too.
But some people are going to do that. The adventurers, the people who go to the Arctic, the people who go deep under the oceans. There's some people who are going to do that very challenging, difficult experiment of going to another planet, even though they may die there and even though it may not live up to their expectations.
Chris, what was it that made you write the book, Worlds Without End?
It was the booming number of exoplanets and the fact that we found hundreds of Earth-like planets. So we know that the Earth is not unique, and that raises the stakes on the fact that there's probably life in the universe and probably a lot of life in the universe.
May have visited us here. What do you think?
Well, I think most of that life is going to be microbial, just based on statistics, because, the Earth was a microbial planet. There was nothing on the Earth big enough to see without a microscope for the first 90% of the history of life on Earth. So I think most of the life out there is going to be microbial too. Maybe some small fraction of it will become large and intelligent and get technology.
What makes a planet habitable?
Well, it's a simplistic definition. It's based on being the right distance from a star that liquid water could exist on the surface.
Right.
And sometimes that's all we know. But we don't know what the atmospheres of these planets are made of. That's those are experiments that are being done now. So it's a pretty simple definition of habitability.
How would we move so many people to a different planet if there was one available?
Exactly. I just don't think we could. I mean, the physics is troublesome on this because the energy cost of accelerating large objects like people and spaceships to anything like a fraction of the speed of light is enormous. It's more than the energy the Earth uses in a year just to set a spaceship of 100 people going to 5% of the speed of light. So it simply isn't going to happen unless we have new technology.
Did you write this book, Chris, to kind of wake up the planet?
A little bit. I mean, to tease people about the fact that there's likely to be a lot of life out there, that astronomers are finding incredible planets, exotic planets with properties very different from ours. Maybe not habitable, very exciting. And then just to say, yeah, this is our place. This is where we have to make our stand.
What about astronomers? What do they say about exoplanets?
Well, they're excited and they want to know more. So the subject has gone through the trawling phase where we gather hundreds and hundreds of more. And now people want to know, what are their properties? What are their detailed properties? And do they have life on them? The life detection experiment is the next phase of this subject.
What is the closest exoplanet to us, Chris?
Well, it seems like Proxima Centauri, which is the nearest star, just 4 and a bit light years away, has at least one Earth-like planet and may have a couple because it's a binary. It's actually a triple system. So the nearest exoplanet is as close as the nearest star.
Chris's book is called Worlds Without End. It just came out. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. How serious do you think, regardless of how one thinks of what we're doing to the planet, but how serious are we running out of things to exist on this planet?
I think the resource limitation argument is interesting. I think it's been overplayed a little because there are a lot of resources on the planet, and just because we need new mining techniques, we need new ways of extracting rare earths and precious metals and the things our civilization depends on. And so technology is coming to the rescue on some of those things. So it's not clear that we're completely running out of resources.
When you were writing the book, Chris, did anything scare you, bother you?
Well, what scared me is thinking about the Drake equation, which is the odds of intelligent life at our level of civilization. And the final factor of the Drake equation is the lifetime, how long a civilization remains in that state. and it's a stability argument. So if we're unstable and we destroy ourselves in a century, then the universe is going to be a lonely place. So that thought scared me a little.
Interesting take on all of that. Where do people get your book?
Oh, it's there on Amazon. It's published by Penguin Random House and MIT Press.
Chris, is it possible, is it conceivable that we are the offspring of a civilization that left its planet because it had to?
Yeah, it's possible, it's conceivable, but biologists would say they've uncovered evidence 4 billion years ago on the Earth of how we started from sort of primordial sludge and gradually grew more complicated, and biology evolved over that time.
It would be intriguing, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And there's no reason that intelligent and advanced life shouldn't exist beyond the Earth, given how many biological experiments there are likely to be.
Give us a scenario, Chris. Kind of paint us a picture of the moment before the decision is made to leave planet Earth. What's happening on the planet?
Well, it's probably a dire scenario of some global pandemic or nuclear war or environmental degradation that far exceeds what we're seeing right now, where, people maybe for a while can live in little bubble domes and small environments, but it's not sufficient to house the population of the planet, so we have to go somewhere else.
Do we have the technology now to go to a different place? I don't think so, do we?
We don't. The energy cost is enormous, and the physics behind that is pretty implacable. It's hard to get around. And also the time taken to go beyond the solar system would be enormous. We'd have to develop some suspended animation technology that we don't have yet.
We haven't learned how to bend space and time and travel that way, too, like through wormholes.
Right. The technology, people get excited about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the space program that's going on in the private sector, but those are still chemical rockets, not very different from, the Saturn V. So we haven't really advanced that much on rockets.
In your opinion, if we kept doing the way we're doing it today, how long does planet Earth got to last? What do you think?
Well, if we get on top of things, hundreds, hopefully thousands of years, I don't think it's going to go south very quickly, but because at least everyone's paying attention now, or most people are paying attention. If we were asleep at the switch, then I wouldn't give us more than a few decades.
If there were no people on the planet, a couple billion more years, you think the planet could exist on its own before the core drives?
Yeah, life is very durable and robust, and it exists, simple forms of life exist in very difficult environments, and, life is going to survive long beyond us. The sun will eventually call a halt to the whole thing in about 4.5 billion years.
What was that aha moment when you woke up and said, I'm going to write Worlds Without End?
Well, I think it was when papers were coming out almost every week finding new Earth-like planets, like ringers for the Earth, almost Earth clones. And I was thinking, wow, these are places where there's no reason there shouldn't be biology. We just don't know how to detect it yet. And that just makes your imagination go.
Do you think, though, that we're really destroying the planet today?
Well, we're running out of the environment. We're using more of the environment. I read a biology article that said that our metabolic footprint of a modern industrial human is sort of like King Kong. So each human is sort of like a King Kong in their footprint, literal and metaphorical, and the energy on the planet, and that's a pretty scary thought.
Are there other planets out there that could support life that you think are out there besides the ones that you just mentioned?
Yeah, and there seem to be hundreds that are about the Earth's size, about the Earth's mass. They're at the temperate zone where there should be water on the surface, and water's not a very rare molecule in the universe. So
could we start breathing there like right away?
Well, we don't. That's a good question, because the atmosphere, that's a difficult experiment to measure the atmosphere. So we haven't found an atmosphere that is a ringer for the Earth yet. And that's partly because we haven't done that experiment. It's just very hard to measure the atmospheres.
And I wouldn't want to live with a mask on for the rest of my life, would you?
No, that's not good. You might as well live on Mars in a bubble dome if you're going to have a mask on. And
then you always have that risk you're going to run out of oxygen or who knows what.
Yeah, this is still a pretty nice planet. Whatever we're doing to it, it's still the best place.
How many spaceships would we need to colonize a planet?
Well, the minimum viable colony, according to biologists, for genetic diversity and not having sort of recessive gene issues is about 120 or 130. So that's a minimal colony. And Elon Musk will tell you he only need one of his big spaceships to get that many people to Mars.
Is it worth keeping life going like that?
Well, some people think that it's an adventure we should do regardless of what happens on Earth, that it's the goal of humans to explore because we explored the Earth and now we're exploring off Earth, and some people are going to do this, regardless of what happens on the Earth. It's just a crazy adventure that people will do, I think.
What about the moons for these exoplanets? Do they have any?
They might. And that's a good question. That's beyond the pale. That's hard to do. So we have not detected an exomoon or a moon around an exoplanet just because they're small and that's at the limit of technology. But yes, we imagine they must exist, just like there are moons of the planets in our solar system.
Can we send a probe to an exoplanet, or is this too far away?
They're too far away, but there's a project called Breakthrough Starshot, which is funded by a Russian billionaire called Yuri Milner, $100 million at least. And they're planning to send fleets of nanobots, gram-sized spacecraft with solar sails, sending them at about 5% of light speed to Proxima Centauri, that nearby star that does have an Earth. That's a very visionary project, and they haven't, they're solving technology problems at the moment, but they plan in 50 or 60 years to get those probes to Proxima Centauri.
Well, look what we've done in 50 or 60 years already. We got to the moon, and here we are doing our thing with little rover missions now.
It's very hard to extrapolate. I mean, think of 50 years of technology with computers or cell phones or whatever it is and try and project 50 years more. It's really hard to do.
Chris, what is your view of the Big Bang? I have to ask you that.
Sure. It's, every now and then it takes some knocks. People say, they found big galaxies in the early universe with James Webb, and that sort of knocks a hole in the Big Bang. I don't think the Big Bang theory is in trouble, but our understanding of how galaxies form and when they form is not very clear, and that's because we don't know what dark matter is or dark energy.
Well, what is the Big Bang? How can something have started from nothing?
Well, that's a problem. So the theory is interesting because it doesn't really answer that question.
It does not.
It just describes what happens from a very dense, early, hot state 13.8 billion years ago, and it just describes that going forward. It doesn't say what caused the Big Bang, and it doesn't say what came before. What
do you think was before?
Well, the universe started, if you believe the theory, as a quantum entity, because the whole universe, 100 billion galaxies, was one smaller than an atom. So it was a quantum event. And maybe there are other quantum events. So people speculate about what they call the multiverse, other universes emerging out of the thing that led to the Big Bang, so that our universe is not unique.
Is it conceivable, biblically speaking, that it was just formed by God out of nothing?
It's certainly possible because the science doesn't speculate a cause. The science is just mute on the cause. The theory doesn't describe it. So, you're free to imagine whatever cause we want, actually, for the universe itself.
Now, you've already said that you would prefer to stay than leave, but given a choice, what would you do?
Oh, I'd stay. I mean, it's going to be those explorers, those adventurers, apart from the sheer danger, many will not survive. As you said, it's going to be a tough existence in a bubble dome or using a mask to breathe in an imperfect atmosphere, away from your friends and your family and everything that's familiar to you. That's a lot of hardship.
What would their rationale for leaving be?
It would just be the same rationale that leads people to go up Mount Everest where there's no air, or go to the Antarctic where it's bone-chillingly cold, or go in the deep ocean where it can crush you in a microsecond, as we know. Same thing, the people who do that will also want to leave the Earth and go to another planet.
Well, but those people who have just experimented with all these other things you've just mentioned always planned on coming back. coming back down from Mount Everest, coming back
They
from the view of the Titanic.
Right, they did, but I think if they were smart and if they were savvy, they understood that 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 people die on Everest. So they understood there's a good chance they might not come back. And if you're leaving the Earth, you've got to know that going into the adventure.
If you were addressing the United Nations, ready to tell them that, folks, we must exit the planet, and assume we had the technology and we had the planet picked, how do you select the people?
No, that's really hard, and I don't know any rational way to do it. I mean, the biologists would say you want a balanced gene pool, so you'd have to have a lot of genetic diversity. But you just have to have some huge, crazy global lottery, I guess. That's the only rational way to do it. It would have to be random.
Rather than leave the planet as if because we think it's going to be over, should we just have some volunteers go to these other planets just to start a new civilization?
Well, I think that might happen. I mean, it may take a century or more. It's not going to happen in a decade, but it could happen. And it'll be like a new branch of the human experiment, because when a subset of humans go to another world, there will be genetically a small gene pool, and so they will diverge from the human tree of life, if you like, and eventually become a new species, which is a kind of a crazy thought.
I mean, if they built a bubble on Mars the size of half a football field, let's say, I still wouldn't want to go and spend the rest of my life there. Would you?
I don't think so, but of course we could do that. I mean, you just described a Mars base that is totally within reason to do in maybe 15 or 20 years. So that will probably happen, and people will volunteer, and they will go, and maybe they'll be able to come back. Mars is not so far away. It's not like going to another planet in another solar system.
I just saw some video, Chris, from the International Space Station. I'd be bored out of my mind up there.
That's right. How do you entertain yourself? I mean, how do you recreate? How do you, how do you stay sane? You've got a limited number of people to talk to as well.
You've been given the offer to go to a different planet to start a new life. Would you go? And what do you do about food and stuff like that, Chris? That's a mess.
Yeah, I suppose we know. I mean, we've seen from The Martian that you can grow potatoes on Mars. That's not even fake. You can. So I think we could grow food.
After a week, I'd be tired of eating potatoes.
Well, you'll probably be eating pills mostly rather than potatoes.
Should be interesting, possible, scary. Let's hope we never have to get to that point.
I agree.
Worlds Without End. Tell me about the cover. All those little planets. What planet is that?
It's an Earth clone, a real Earth clone that we found some 100 light years away, sort of viewed prismatically, just to give the sense that there are many of these out there.
You think if there was a poll taken from planetary system wide, what do you think the percent would be about those people who would offer to go to a different planet? I think it might be surprisingly high.
Maybe. I think you're right that it's a harsh environment. It's a scary prospect. I think it would be small-ish, but of course you don't need that many because you can't send that many.
The people who would be apt to go might be those that are unhappy with living here right now.
Yeah, I don't know if that forms a very good gene pool for a new civilization or a new society, actually.
And then how do you structure organization, law, all these things?
Well, there's no space law, so that's an interesting point. I mean, space law doesn't really exist because there's no jurisdiction. The UN doesn't run the law of space, so it'll be a Wild West. They'll have to make their own laws.
As they did when they came to the United States, North America.
Exactly.
Interesting take on all of that. What do scientists say about this possibility?
Well, they acknowledge it's possible. It's difficult to go to another planet, especially in the solar system. Mars, that's probably going to happen in decades. Going to another star, everyone thinks that's centuries away just because of the energy requirement. But it still might happen.
With these exoplanets that have been discovered, have we ascertained whether it has liquid water?
Yes, we've found evidence for water vapor or liquid water on not a huge number, but a significant number of these planets. And we know the conditions are right for liquid water, and we know that liquid water is a pretty common molecule in the universe, actually. So the Earth is not even the most watery planet we've found. The Earth's oceans are a pretty small percentage of the planet's mass, and there are exoplanets out there with 10% of their total mass or 20% that's oceans. So that's 100 times the Earth's ocean.
Years ago, Seth Shostak told us that he believes the primordial soup is the same throughout the universe, and I would agree with that. How about you?
Sure. I think chemistry is universal because astronomers, and I do cosmology and look billions of light years away to distant galaxies, they have the same chemical ingredients. There's carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, billions of light years away. There's water, billions of light years away on other galaxies. So, the primordial soup is going to have a universal chemical composition.
What do you think? Are there any companies involved right now in developing plans like this, Chris?
Well, the only ones about leaving the Earth is probably Elon Musk because he has his Starship and he has a goal to go to Mars and set up a colony there at some point.
Maybe he's going to start Twitter up there.
Yeah, if he doesn't burn through his resources with Twitter, he's losing a lot of wealth with that purchase.
That was not a good idea, I don't think, but we shall see.
Yeah, but he has that goal. So, and he's he's a little crazy, but it's dangerous to doubt him. He's done some amazing things with SpaceX. What
equipment is out there today that would allow us to do many of the things you say in your book, Worlds Without End?
Well, I mean, as far as going to Mars and setting up a colony, almost all the technologies are in place. We can get people there. We can mine the soil and get from the soil oxygen to breathe. We can turn it into building materials because you don't want to bring stuff there. It's very expensive to drag materials and supplies there. We could grow food there. So, you could be pretty much self-contained once you get there.
I was told years ago, before we went to the moon, that they were looking for volunteers, astronauts, who would go to the moon on a one-way mission because they didn't know if they were going to be able to get that person back. And they were going to drop food down there and everything else, and the person was going to stay there until they died. Did you ever hear that?
Yes, I heard that. And actually, NASA got sort of outed on having a similar plan for Mars, to keep the cost down. Of course, a one-way trip is cheaper. And they quickly backtracked and said, no, we actually want to bring people back.
Chris, what does a solar sail look like?
A solar sail is a sort of gossamer-thin material, sort of like Mylar. Mylar would make a good solar sail, but they actually have better materials. So it's very thin, it's very strong, it's highly reflective. And so when you shine energy onto it, it gives an impulse just by conservation of momentum. It reflects back the energy. It could be microwaves or light. And then it gives it a kick. And so you attach your tiny little spacecraft to the solar sail. Now, we've used solar sails in the solar system for slightly bigger spacecraft, but they're just moving around the solar system. We're not trying to get them away from the solar system.
Is it truly a good way to travel?
It's a clever way to travel because the energy source is free. It's using sunlight. And we can make the material to make pretty big solar sails if we want to accelerate spacecraft through the solar system. So I think it's a good way to get around the solar system.
You have a chapter devoted to mining asteroids. Is that really conceivable?
It's conceivable. It's the kind of thing, it's like the Wild West. It's like the first gold miners and going to California. People will lose their shirts. There'll be fortunes lost and then maybe some fortunes gained. I mean, in principle, a kilometer-sized near-Earth asteroid, if you pick it carefully, could have about a few $1 trillion worth of rare earths and a few $1 trillion of precious metals. That's a lot of resources.
Could they have diamonds on it?
Could have diamonds, yeah. I don't know if that's the most lucrative part of a asteroid because the metallic content, I think, is the most valuable, and it's probably the easiest to mine as well.
And what could be on there? Uranium, anything?
Sure, all the things we would have on the Earth. And in fact, with spectroscopy done and remote sensing, you can sort of scope out your asteroid and pick the best one, pick the one that has the highest fraction of metals or highest fraction of rare earths. And then, of course, you have a clever thing to do. You have to take this near-Earth asteroid and alter its trajectory to bring it in a captive orbit of the Earth-Moon system so that you can mine it.
You think an asteroid is a planet that never formed, or do you think it is a planet that blew up?
It could be a little of both. The asteroid belt seems to be the debris left over that just never formed a planet. If you sweep up all the asteroids in the asteroid belt, it's only about 5% of Earth's mass, so it's really not much mass, and most of it got scattered away a long time ago. So it's more likely to be a failed planet than a destroyed planet.
What about a failed moon?
Could be a failed moon for sure. I mean, the largest asteroids, 1,000 kilometers, they're just as big as many of these recently discovered moons of the giant planets. So there's an overlap in the sizes.
How long have these astronauts been aboard the ISS? What's been the maximum?
I think the record as a Russian astronaut is about 800 days, so it's a couple of years.
A couple of years, God.
A few Americans have been for over a year and a half. And they've had some real health issues when they come back down.
That is true. And mental issues, don't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hard to be up there. And remember, near-Earth orbit is just like the equivalent of half a day's drive straight up. It's not that far. It's only 300 miles.
Chris, when you still are at the University of Arizona, what do the younger students want to know these days?
Oh, they want to know the big questions of cosmology. If I'm teaching astronomy, the ones we were talking about, what caused the Big Bang, what's dark matter, what's dark energy, are we going to live on another planet? Some of the things we've been talking about tonight.
So they're curious.
Oh, yeah, they're very curious. They don't necessarily want to go, though. I sometimes poll them if they want to go to another planet or even just on a joyride to the moon or Mars, and it's a small fraction. It's maybe a quarter.
Chris, the work that you've done, and you were saying it was the discovery of exoplanets that got you to think this way. Where does it go next? Well, the big prize is to find life on another planet, because that hasn't happened yet. So we've just been discovering all these planets, and many of them are Earth-like, and many of them might be habitable. That's all very exciting, but now you've got to ask the question, can you find life? And it's going to be microbial life. The methods are there for us to sniff the atmospheres of some of these Earth-like planets and see if those atmospheres have been altered by microbes, as the air we breathe was by microbes that put oxygen there billions of years ago. Chris, what do you think of the Space Force?
I don't think it's been a very necessary thing. I mean, NASA does what they do, and, really it's got a military motivation, because obviously we're in a pretty competitive superpower rivalry with China, who have very big aspirations in space.
Sure.
And so I think in large part the Space Force was a reaction to this new space race we're having with China as opposed to Russia, which is a kind of poor country now. So I think that's what motivated the Space Force. It's not doing a lot of science. It's not doing a lot of space exploration. I think NASA is still the agency that's doing that exciting work.
Chris, thank you for being on the program. Let's not let 6 years go by this time.
No, absolutely not. No, it's a pleasure, George. It's good to be with you.
All right, you take care of yourself. The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.